続きましてセッション9未来のモビリティ
Next is session 9, the future mobility. Shaping the future of the mobility, the transformation through shaping the future of mobility, transformation through ride sharing and self-driving cars. And the moderator is Yoko Kubota.
パネリストは
Panelist from Cabify, co-founder and CEO Juan de Antonio. From Lyft, co-founder and CEO Logan Green.
Kanazawa 大学
From Kanazawa University, Associate Professor, Institute for Frontier Science Initiative, Naoki Suganuma, Associate Professor.
それでは久保田さん
So, Kubota-san, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for attending this session. I am going to speak in English as MC.
My name is Yoko Kubota. I'm a reporter for the Wall Street Journal covering the automotive industry in Tokyo. Today we're going to be talking about future mobility, and we'll be hearing from three of the pioneers in this field, specifically ride sharing and self-driving cars. And as we all know, ride sharing has picked up globally over the last few years. With the tap of a smartphone, so many people can get cars, and that's improved access to mobility. And at the same time, I think it's opened up a lot of business opportunities in markets around the world. And meanwhile, self-driving cars, all kinds of players are coming into the field trying to develop the technology, academia, automakers, as well as tech companies like Google. And these two fields could actually merge, come together to create a new mobility and open up transportation opportunities for a lot of people. But at the same time, there's still a lot of social, technological, as well as regulatory hurdles. So we'd like to hear more about where the direction is heading to, and what specific steps these people are taking in order to make things happen. So let's start off first with an introduction from each one of us. Juan, would you like to start off with what you're doing now?
Definitely. Well, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Cabify is the company we started 5 years ago. As you can see in this slide, we provide transportation services, and the drivers, as you can guess by the way this one specifically is dressed, are professional drivers. Our goal as a company is to replace vehicle ownership. And in this slide, which I'm sure it's a bit dense, but I'll go very quickly through it. What we try to explain is how vehicle ownership is being challenged. A few years ago, the only options people had were either to own a car or rent a car without a driver, get a car with a driver, and that could be a taxi or an executive vehicle, or not pay at all and do hitchhiking, right? But with the recent advances in technology, in social networks, mobility, etc., more and more options are appearing, and even these three options are being challenged by disruptors. So you see a lot of logos there. Some of them are local to the markets where we operate, and some of them you might know, like Lyft, who is here too. The idea behind this slide is that we are all in the same industry. Companies that rent vehicles by the hour or by the minute, companies that provide you with a taxi on the tap of a button, or companies that allow you to share a journey with someone. We are all trying to disrupt car ownership. We take different routes, but at the end there should be some type of consolidation here. So Cabify is mostly, or is initially in the middle section, where we use private drivers to disrupt vehicle ownership. And where we are geographically, that's what this slide is trying to show. On the left side, you can see the dark. The dark is the US, and everything that is south of the US is the markets we are targeting. On the top right, you see a small island. That's Spain and Portugal. So we are in Latin America and Spain and Portugal. We are in some countries now, the ones that are on a darker orange, and we are entering new markets very soon in the lighter orange. So basically, Latin America, it's a huge region. On the right side, you can see some stats, but there are over Latin America plus Iberian Peninsula is almost 700 million people. And there are over 100 million vehicles there, so huge industry ready for disruption. We had a session before about India, just to put things into perspective. In India, they mentioned there were 22 different languages. Here, there are only 2 languages, and even though there are many countries, the opportunity for a regional play, I would say, is easier than in other regions. No? So this is Cabify. This is the market that we are targeting. Hope to have an interesting discussion with everyone.
Thank you, Juan. Moving on to Logan, please.
All right. I'm Logan Green, the co-founder and CEO of Lyft. Oh, here we go. Oh, I think we're having trouble with the slides here. There we go. Okay, so Lyft is a ride-sharing company. We operate in the United States. Our business, our mission is to connect people and communities through better transportation. So today, we operate in 200 cities across the United States. We have over 300,000 drivers. There are 1,000 employees in the company, and we're based in San Francisco. And we provide over 10 million rides per month. And the company is not quite 4 years old. So we've raised over $2 billion from some top investors, including General Motors, Alibaba, and of course, Rakuten. And while our focus, like Cabify's focus is on Latin and Spanish-speaking countries, our focus is on the United States. And we've created a global alliance with best-in-class companies around the world. So Didi is the #1 ride-sharing service in all of China. And they have the majority of the market share there. They have the best coverage, the most drivers. Same Ola is the top provider in India, and Grab Taxi in Southeast Asia. So we've announced a global alliance, and much like you can take your cell phone and without doing anything, you can travel anywhere in the world and it'll connect to local networks and the best local networks, we're doing the same thing. So starting very soon, you'll be able to travel to China as a Lyft user, open up the Lyft app, and behind the scenes, seamlessly, have the ride fulfilled by a Didi car. And the same thing for Chinese travelers to the US. And this is something, Cabify could be part of this alliance. Other best-in-class players around the world can join together so that travelers have complete global coverage. And we announced our latest fundraise in January. General Motors invested $500 million. And we're working on 2 very exciting programs. The first one is called Express Drive. And the idea is that most people in the US who are looking for work don't have a car that qualifies for Lyft. And to make life easier, we've partnered with General Motors to provide a very flexible weekly rental program where actually for free, a potential driver can get a great General Motors car and use it on the Lyft platform if they drive full-time. If they're not driving full-time, then they pay a weekly rental rate. We just launched this in Chicago about 2 weeks ago. We had the 100 cars snapped up right away. We have a wait list of over 1,000 people, and we're going to be rolling this out across the country. But long-term, we share a vision for the way that the transportation market develops, I think we all share a similar vision, and we'll get to talk about that today, of one where the car ownership model disappears. And 10 years from now, I think we all expect this migration to transportation as a service. And the combination of these on-demand networks that we're operating today with autonomous vehicles will provide a completely new paradigm for consumer transportation. And we share that vision with General Motors, and we're working very aggressively to make exciting moves in that space. All right, thanks.
Thank you. 菅沼先生、お願いします。
So next, I'd like to ask Mr. Suganuma. Thank you very much. My name is Suganuma from Kanazawa University. As you see on the slide, our research lab, out of all of the universities in Japan, there are only a handful that research autonomous driving. The two gentlemen before me focused, I think, on the service, so ride sharing is their focus. For us at the university, we focus on the autonomous vehicle itself, and we do believe and we hope to contribute to the advancement of autonomous vehicles. You see two cars, and these two have been developed at our research lab, and these are both autonomous vehicles. On the right, you see the first generation, the left. Well, this is actually the third generation. So we use such vehicles to study and research autonomous driving in vehicles. Now, this slide or this video that you're looking at, we have developed many vehicles in the past, and we are showing you some outcomes. On the bottom right, this is an unmanned car driving. So if this were to actually drive real roads, perhaps as was just discussed, it can contribute to the ride-sharing model. And if we consider unmanned driving on the upper right, as you see in the video, the vehicle needs to precisely understand its surrounding environment on the left. If they are driving in the residential areas, for instance, or outside of the city, they need to recognize the stoplights. Now, on the bottom left, you see the sensors and computers in action, understanding the vehicle's surrounding environment. So what was considered as a dream in the past, autonomous driving that is, through the advancement of computing and sensors, we believe that it is becoming very much a reality now. And so what humans can sense, cars, vehicles can sense as well. So we are into that era. Now, based on these research activities, as a university, this is a first experiment, and we did a public road experiment to validate these autonomous vehicles. And this area is actually quite a good environment to conduct these experiments. And I do believe that the governing bodies are very accommodative, and also we believe that it will contribute in the future to ride-sharing as well. So I would like to focus on the technical aspects of autonomous driving, and I do believe that I can learn from the service side of this endeavor as well. Thank you very much.
There are two themes, but I think we'd like to start off the discussion first focus on ride-sharing. So that'll be Juan and Logan. You've both mentioned the disruption of car ownership or changing models of car ownership. And that's very interesting and exciting. At the same time, there are traditional players like taxi drivers or also regulators, perhaps, that are concerned about these types of disruptions. Of course, automakers could be among them as well, or they could function as a partner. Would you be able to each elaborate a little bit on that, situation, protests happening in different cities, how you view that problem or issue, and how you're dealing with that? Juan, would you like to start off?
Definitely. So in our case, we have operations in different markets, as I showed you before, and each market has a different regulatory framework. Typically, in general, in Europe, the regulator has done a decent job providing a taxi service with a standard level of quality, while in Latin America, the norm is quite different. The regulator hasn't been successful in providing that level of service to the public. No? And as a result of this, the taxi service in many countries in Latin America is unsafe. And that, together with insufficient public transport infrastructure puts a lot of stress into cities, and mostly the middle class doesn't have an option other than driving their own vehicle. No? So regulators, I mean, there isn't a solution that can be applied to all of the markets. What we are seeing here is technology is providing us with new alternatives. If we think what's coming in 5, 10 years, 20, whenever the autonomous driving is ready, probably that will accelerate the move to avoid car ownership, and we need to think a transition that works in every market. So there is a single solution that will work for all of the markets. In some markets, the taxis are providing a good service, and the taxi drivers paid $100,000 for a medallion, and we need to think how to keep these people involved in the industry. And in other markets where the current taxi industry is dysfunctional, the solution will be different. No? So.
Logan?
I think it's a huge issue that's going to face every country as a lot of jobs, and it's not going to happen right away, but a lot of jobs are facing this risk of automation, and it's a very real problem, and it's a scary problem. I think one of the lessons we can see is over 100 years ago, over 90% of the population worked in agriculture, and now it's less than 10%. And it's okay. We transitioned. So in the near term, the transition is difficult, but in the long term, it allows us to do more and to spend more time on harder problems. So in the long term, I think it'll be okay. And then getting very specific to our industry, the transition from taxis to ride sharing has been one of the biggest job creators in the US. So if we look at San Francisco, which was the very first market when we launched, taxis, I don't know why this is the case, but around the world, even in free market, sort of capitalist countries, the government has fixed the number of cars that can be on the road, and they've fixed prices. It's the least free market approach you can take, but for some reason in the taxi industry, that's the approach that's been taken everywhere. And so when we went in and we worked on a new model with ride sharing, and we have dynamic prices, and you have unlimited number of drivers, the taxi, if you sort of include us in the taxi market in San Francisco has grown over 7 times since we launched, creating tens of thousands of jobs. Across the country, we're talking hundreds of thousands of jobs. And so the boon to the economy today is incredible. And as autonomous vehicles become a reality, and this would be a very exciting conversation to have, but from my understanding of it, the first vehicles that will be on the road will be very limited. And so they'll go maybe slow speeds, maybe 25 miles an hour. They won't operate during all weather conditions when it's snowing, or very foggy, or the road conditions are tough. They won't operate. So it'll be limited, but it'll be very inexpensive. Unmanned transportation will be very inexpensive. And so along the routes in the areas where they can operate, I think it'll grow the whole market in a big way. People will flock to it. And then they'll have more need because maybe they decide to get rid of their car, or they are using ride sharing more because of autonomous vehicles. Then they'll have more need for all those other trips that still involve a human driver, when the conditions are bad, when they have to go faster. And so I think in the near term, autonomous vehicles, like talking the next 5, 10 years, will actually mean more people using ride sharing and more job opportunities for drivers. Long term, though, of course, when the technology gets good enough, it will be replacing those jobs, and that will be a transition that we should be thinking about and planning for.
If I could build a little bit more on that, given the current situation in Japan, when you look at the size of the taxi industry and you see a trend, and this size has been constantly declining, except for maybe a hike in 2013. And prices here are mostly fixed. No? So if you think how to create jobs and how to grow the industry, if you give users more options and you allow for different price points, probably the industry will grow and it will be better for everyone involved. No?
I definitely like to touch on Japan, as well as some of the issues you were talking about a little bit later. But due to time, I also wanted to hear a little bit from Suganuma Sensei about self-driving technology. What's the state of the research in autonomous driving around the world? 今、世界でのその自動運転の研究であったり現状というのはどういう
So, what is the state or the research for autonomous driving?
使いながら
So let me use the slides to explain the current status of the autonomous driving in Japan. The research in this area, even on the global scale, it has certain history. I think we started the research quite some time ago. However, the major themes in those research is focusing on the expressway or highway. So up until 10 years ago, I think people are researching on the autonomous driving at expressways. The METI was driving Energy ITS project. And this is the truck driving. Well, the interval between these two trucks have to be minimized to 4 meters so that it can reduce the CO2 emission. Of course, the subsequent truck can be unmanned. That will reduce the cost and also that will reduce the energy, so it will improve the logistics. And of course, when it comes to the passenger cars, of course, we have to improve, or we can improve the safety and security. So yes, we can see the benefit on this expressway or highway. On the other hand, I think it has been focusing on the expressway, so that's quite limited in terms of the benefit. On the other hand, when I think you are also exposed to the different news, the recent research is not just focusing on the express or highway, but in the regular general road. And technically speaking, it is possible to have the autonomous driving on the general road. And the reason behind this is because the highly precise digital map is enabled on the vehicles, and because of that, sensors or computer uncovered area maybe can be supplemented by this kind of computer capabilities. I think ride sharing is another area which autonomous driving can make contribution. And when it comes to the autonomous driving, it can be unmanned. So when we think about all those, I think this is really different value to be created compared against the traditional cars. By creating new value, it will expand the size of the market. And yes, we also agree on that. For instance, maybe one could be ride sharing, and the other is public transportation, let's say buses. Maybe we can use autonomous driving technology for the public transportation like buses, and this is going to be quite significant in Japan. The current status in Japan, well, maybe not in metropolitan Tokyo, but in Ishikawa Prefecture, which I live in. The population is declining in Ishikawa Prefecture, but still it's an aging society, and also the people are leaving Ishikawa Prefecture. So when it comes to those areas, what is happening is that there is hardly any public transportation system. Why? I talked to the people at the city hall, and because there are less younger people, so we can't really rely on anyone who can succeed those transportation system. So maybe it's going to be a new vehicle or new driving, having this autonomous driving applied for the public transportation. So why it is getting a lot of attention from the public? Maybe at the beginning in the U.S., the Urban Challenge in the U.S., that was the initial project. As you see to your right, this is the autonomous car developed by Stanford University, and this has no man. So inside, there are tons of sensors and computers, and this is actually driving without having any person. So the Stanford University professors and also the researchers from Carnegie Mellon is exactly the car without any man. In EU, GCDC, the Grand Cooperative Driving Challenge in the EU, and Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, which won this contest. This is a German university. This university is driving the Daimler's 100-kilometer autonomous driving in the regular load, including the city. So it's being successful. What about Japan? Well, as far as I understand, so maybe it might be wrong, but in 2011, Toyota Motors showed the demonstration of the autonomous driving at Tokyo Motor Show in 2011. And that was the first time for Japanese OEM to demonstrate the autonomous driving. And as you see, that right, bottom right, and maybe in 2013, we have had quite a lot of events. Maybe Nissan Motors also demonstrated the autonomous driving car. So that's boosting this area. Well, currently, the technology for this autonomous driving is now trying to be applied to the community which have a lot of elderly people. Well, where we have this demonstration is Suzu City in Ichika Prefecture, and people over 65 years old is accounting for about 45% of the entire population in this city. So maybe 1 in every 2 people is elderly people. And in the past, there was a railway, but it was abandoned, and maybe 1 bus per day, so less taxi or cabs. So there's no one who can really the players in these areas. So maybe that's where we can implement this autonomous car technology. So this is the video of this demonstration. I am fast forwarding, but to your left, it is moving into the intersection and it recognizes the traffic signal and then turning right. So we have conducted a different test, but it's not perfect yet. From the technical perspective, we still have some issues, maybe foggy or snow days. It's still difficult to have this autonomous driving. And also the sensors, we have to improve the sensors as well. So we have technical challenges, but as you see on this video, the regular road, I think the cars can now be driven on the regular road. So maybe this is contributing to pave the way for the new market. And for that purpose, we want to do good research. So in Suzu City, you conducted the demonstration or POC. What did you find, especially for the elderly people? Maybe what kind of acceptance or reaction do elderly people show to this kind of cutting-edge technology? Well, of course, I haven't really talked to every single elderly people, but as far as I understand, I heard, well, maybe the elderly people in Suzu City said they go and see the doctors at the hospitals, and they have to drive on their own, maybe 20-30 kilometers from home to the hospitals. And also maybe some elderly people live with their kids, daughters or sons, and maybe those could be the driver, but going to see a doctor or going to the supermarket, it's not easy for those elderly people because they don't really have a good public transportation system. So we want to have better public transportation, but they didn't really get used to it. So that's why they don't really feel it's inconvenient. But still, they had to, drive. And I think the ride sharing is one. And also, maybe we can actually apply the technology to the public transportation is another, but creating the new industry with less cost, that's something which we have to have. I think this kind of cities or towns are going to be increasing in terms of the number into the future in Japan, so we have to find certain industry for those regions. Thank you very much. So now the ride sharing and autonomous driving, how are they connected?
How ride sharing and autonomous driving would actually come together. Maybe I'd like to ask Logan here. You've partnered with GM, and I'm sure that there's the long-term vision of autonomous driving coming into the picture. Can you elaborate a little bit about what you're trying to do in the long run and what's also happening more recently in that realm?
Yeah, so I think this is going to be the biggest change that we see to our daily life and the biggest change we see to the design of cities and our economy in our lifetimes. There's going to be a massive reshaping. Transportation, consumers spend the second most money on transportation. Housing is number one, transportation is number two, food is number three. So consumers spend more money on their cars than they spend on food, and the whole industry is about to flip. So I grew up in Los Angeles, which is a city built around the car. And planners estimate that 50% of the land in LA is dedicated to the automobile, from parking a car to driving on a car to huge freeways. The city is really built around cars. And with autonomous vehicles, they're constantly in circulation. One car can support the needs of 10 or more people. You'll have many, many less cars on the road, and you won't have to park them everywhere. So houses can be built without big garages. Streets won't be lined with parked cars. Less of the city and less of our lives will be built around the car. And cities, I think, will be better places to live and will be built more around people. So when we think about some of the economic implications of this, the ownership model is based around you go and you buy this car. And then you go to somebody else and you buy insurance. And you go to somebody else and you pay for them to repair it, somebody else to clean it, somebody else to maintain it, fuel it. And then you park it, and you get parking tickets, and so on. All of that goes away. So there are going to be a lot of companies that go out of business with this transition, and other companies that'll become much more important. And in the new model with transportation as a service, when you open up an app, you'll have whatever car you want. So you'll have a cheap commuter car that'll get you to work quickly. You can get a larger car where you can sleep or watch a movie with your family on a longer trip. Or you can get a more luxurious car for a business meeting. If you even want to have the same car, you want to keep your stuff in your car, or you put your children's car seats in there, you could reserve a car for a year or 3 years. So you have the whole experience of ownership will be translated to buying through this network. And that means that all of those other relationships with all those other insurance companies, maintenance companies will go away, and you'll have one relationship with a network that will provide all of your transportation needs. So the implications for our daily life, our cities, our economy are massive. And I think most people agree on what this is going to look like 10 years from now. But nobody knows exactly what the path to get there will look like. And I think it'll be a very, very exciting process to get there.
And how does your partnership with GM come into the picture here? You know, when I talk with automakers based in Japan, a lot of times it seems like there are certain parties that understand that business model is going to change and that they would need to take some action, perhaps partner with companies like you guys. At the same time, there are other parties within the company that are quite traditional and don't want to let go of their current business model. But how is that working out with your partnership with GM?
So GM is very forward-thinking in this area. They're in a fortunate position where in the US, they make all of their money selling big trucks and SUVs. And those trucks and SUVs are sold in the rural communities. So they see a big opportunity to make aggressive moves to take market share within cities. And ride sharing, and even autonomous ride sharing, will first unfold in cities. So in the near term, they see it as a large business opportunity where they want to be a first mover in this market. And long term, even the SUV and truck market in rural towns will be impacted, but that will take a much longer amount of time. So I think you need three things to pull off this type of service. You need to be able to make vehicles at scale, and so General Motors is very good at that. You need to be able to build the robot, right, which is the artificial intelligence and the software and the sensors to make decisions. General Motors recently acquired a company called Cruise Automation to augment their capabilities for running this robot. And then you need the network, which is what Lyft provides. So together, we're able to offer, I think, the full package experience for a consumer.
And Juan, what are your thoughts on this area? Is, for instance, any car makers in Japan or elsewhere approaching you, trying to work with you? What about your visions on self-driving and combining that with your platform?
So definitely we see a lot of movements in the industry. We see the European, our headquarters are in Europe, so we have more relationships with European automakers. And we see them either making acquisitions in the space or making investment in the space, like in the case of Lyft. Daimler in Europe has been very, very aggressive. In Spain, for instance, they recently launched an initiative with vehicles you can rent by the hour. It's working very well. They were doing that in Germany for a while. This is a big question mark for automakers as well as for regulators. And I come from the telecom industry, and one of the most important lines of that are in common between this industry and the telecom industry is that creating this network, it's very expensive. It requires a lot of investment, and you don't want to have a single player. As an economy, you don't want to have a single player, especially if it's a foreigner controlling the industry. No? So automakers and regulators need to think forward and see what type of industry we want here and who is going to pay for it. No? Because eventually cities will be profitable. When you see the paradigm of how cities are built, every company will want to be in these cities and provide services because they will be profitable. But what about the rural areas where we were discussing? No? Who will want to invest in those rural areas if the business case doesn't make sense? No? So the regulator and the car makers and us as service providers need to think about those challenges too.
菅沼先生。
I would like to ask Professor Suganuma as well. Here in Japan, rideshare, autonomous driving, do you see the potential of these two worlds merging? There was also mention of the service being applied to specific cities, for instance, Asian population cities, and you have to see the merit in doing such a project as well. So do you see potential? How do you see potential? Uber has announced some experiments as well. So if you have any thoughts, insights on this, please. Our experiments or validation projects, we are focusing on the depopulated areas. We are focused on a very local area. But when I ask around and receive feedback, the fact that we just cannot find drivers that are willing to be registered because there are not that many young people. So we have to focus on that challenge first. And it goes back to needs and wants. And we have to discuss that with the regulatory bodies. But because there are not that many people, the city itself becomes very, very small. So if we embed these cities or these rural cities with autonomous driving vehicles, then that might clear the issue of a lack of population or a young population. Now, there will also be maintenance fees and costs that need to be incurred. But in comparison to, let's say, a large bus, on a year-to-year basis, you would have to incur driver costs, labor costs, and so forth. But the autonomous driving vehicles, you have to first pay up initial costs, but then the running costs can be kept minimum. So when we consider Japan and the attributes of the local cities in Japan, there are a lot of commonalities in the rural areas. So there is potential there, I believe. Now, that's it for the rural local areas. But when we consider scale and volume share, we do have to focus on the metropolitan areas. So yes, they are equipped with public transport. However, the access to get to public transport is very limited in some areas. which means that autonomous drive vehicles can be leveraged. In other words, it will provide the last 1 mile in the metropolitan areas, and so the volume share would be very, very strong, I think.
One thing that's very exciting that we're seeing today with our business is that last mile solution. And we've launched a service we call Lyft Line, where you have one driver. It's like think of it as a dynamic on-demand transit route. So door to door, you request a ride, and it matches you with other passengers taking that same trip. So every transportation route that you can imagine can be lit up overnight, and you only have a car there when you need one. So we have a Lyft car that'll pick up multiple passengers taking the same trip, and it's roughly half the cost of normal Lyft. And the top reason we see people using Lyft Line is as that last mile solution. So I think as you move into this fully digital world, where you can have the servers in the cloud calculating these routes on the fly, it opens up the possibility for what public transportation can mean, and I think ultimately, hopefully, make public transportation a lot more convenient and a lot more accessible.
I also wanted to ask a little bit about your future business plans from hereafter, and it overlaps with some of the stuff that we were already talking about. But Japanese market, maybe Juan and Logan can talk a little bit about how you see this market. Seems like regulators are not really any place close to opening up the market, changing regulations to make it more flexible for ride sharing at the moment. Public transportation is very good in big cities, but as Suganuma sensei mentioned, in countryside communities, there are some issues. How do you see the potential of Japan for your business or as a market for ride sharing?
So what I've noticed, I've been in Japan for a very limited time, and my sample is pretty biased, but in Tokyo, the public transportation system is excellent. At peak times it's a bit crowded. And the price is really well, not low, but acceptable. No? Everyone can pay that. And the gap between that price and the taxi fares is pretty high. So it's, let's say that not that many people are willing to pay the premium. No? And when you walk around the city, even at peak times, you see a lot of taxis waiting idle on the streets, except maybe when it's raining. So again, I think there is an opportunity here to increase the size of the market in cities, and then you're going to generate some surplus or some revenues and positive EBITDA from there, and maybe you need to use that to reinvest in less profitable areas like the rural areas. No? So that ties back a little bit to my comment before. You need to see the market as a whole and the challenges the country is facing, where we're going, and how do you set up a structure that is going to attract investment and ensure that it fulfills the need of the people. No? So again, I don't see a clear solution to this, but you need to combine the pieces. And using again the example of the telecom industry, everyone wanted to cover the cities, and nobody wanted to put optic fiber in the villages. Maybe you have to create a fund to cover those areas. So something we need to think about and cooperate with the regulators to figure out a solution that is serving the public good. No?
I think we both take a similar approach to working with regulators, which is to be very collaborative. It's not true for all of the competitors in this space, but we try to take the time to engage in a conversation, and we want to operate somewhere where we're wanted. And I think the top priority for regulators is very much in line with our top priority, which is safety. And on-demand transportation service has a lot of safety advantages compared to a taxi. So when you get in a taxi, there's no record of that. You're completely anonymous, and it's untracked. So people act badly in anonymous scenarios. Study after study shows that if you have an identity attached to it, you behave better. And not only do we have an identity attached to it, but we track every GPS point every second. So if there is an incident, we know exactly when and where those people are. And the next piece is at the end of each ride, the driver and passenger rate each other. So in real time, at the end of every ride, you get an account of how that ride went. And if there was an issue, we have a 24/7 trust and safety team that can intervene. Taxis also don't have that. In addition, we do all of the same and are happy to do all of the same very rigorous background checks, vehicle checks, driving record checks, and so on. So we're actually able to make a huge sort of leap forward in terms of safety, which is, I think, the number one. And number two is on reliability. So I think Japan probably has the best taxis in the world. I think the quality is incredible. But people still complain that when it's raining, when there's a big event, Tokyo obviously has Japan has the Olympics coming up in a few years. So you have a big surge of users. You need a dynamic system that can handle all of that. And people don't feel like they can rely on a taxi during a big event, or if they need to ride to the airport early in the morning or in the suburbs or whatever it is, the system is good, but it fails people often. So I think it takes time to work with folks, and we want to make sure that that's a very positive relationship. But ultimately, I think all of our interests are very aligned.
Interesting how you mentioned the relationship with regulators, because Uber, I think last year, tried out a program in Fukuoka City that didn't necessarily, match the interests or couldn't agree with the regulators, and they had to stop it shortly after they started this program. And that makes me wonder, like, how is the competitive landscape forming up when you look at this area globally, with Uber being a very big player, and you're also competing with them, but at the same time you're forming some partnerships, especially Lyft, with other ride-sharing companies in different countries. How do you see the competitive landscape of this industry forming up?
So we focus on providing a better service than Uber in the United States by focusing on the driver. And so we've competed with Uber for the longest time in San Francisco. That was our first market, that was their first market. And we continue to take market share where it's mid-40s. And I think it's reasonable that we would pass Uber and become more popular. And we're seeing this play out in a lot of cities. So they had a couple-year head start with their limo business. But we were actually the first ones to launch the sort of peer-to-peer, less expensive level service. So I think ultimately we're able to compete with them by treating our drivers better, taking a hospitality and service mindset towards it, and we believe that happy drivers make for happy passengers, and that by continuing to invest in the driver, we're able to provide an experience that people prefer. I think they view the driver as a commodity, and a lot of drivers feel very mistreated by Uber continuing to squeeze them. So that's how we look at competing in the U.S. I think while Uber's raised a lot of money and operates in a lot of cities, they are not winning in most of their markets. I think they're burning a ton of money and in a pretty tough position in China, India, Southeast Asia, all of these places. They are making huge investments, but it's not clear that that's going to be a good bet for them.
Juan, did you have any thoughts on this area?
No, I was just happy to see we are also pretty aligned in our strategy. We also look at long-term relationships with drivers and trying to, especially in Latin America, where there is this issue around safety. So you need to spend time in filtering and training your drivers and making sure they provide this good level of service. No? And so the situation, again, I will go back to my favorite comment here, which was regulators and what do you want to happen in this industry. You have to, again, think forward. This is still a very small industry. When you look at our revenues and the size of the vehicle manufacturer market, they are still much bigger than us. But this is growing, and eventually, we hope, what we envision is that we will represent this huge market. And you have to think about the practices that are allowed and not allowed in this industry. If you allow for practices, anti-competitive practices, you might end up with monopolies that are not good for the economy. No? So regulators are slow creating a structure or a framework for new industries because we move very, very quickly. And even when they do, most of the time they don't have enough information to look 5 years forward and think, what do I need to do now in order to have a healthy industry in the future? No? So many of the challenges we face with competition in our markets relate to that, relate to doing things now that they are allowed to do. But if you look into the future, those things shouldn't happen now.
Let's open up the floor for some questions. 質疑をしたいなというふうに思うんですけれども。
So now we'd like to entertain questions from the floor. If you have any questions, please. We want to entertain questions from the floor.
かなり
It's really bright, so I may not be able to see if there is any hands.
ごめんなさい。もし MC の方どなたか手を挙げてらっしゃる方がいればマイクを渡していただけます。
If there is anyone who is raising your hand, is here.
方お願いします。
Thank you very much. And I have a question for Juan and Logan. And I think ride sharing has a great possibility to solve many social problems. And is there any particular problems or challenge you want to solve by riding sharing ride? Thank you.
I'm not sure I understood the question completely. You mean, is there any problem we are facing to complete racing? In order for it to be successful? No, definitely. I mean, Logan touched on that. No? I mean, when you take out vehicles off the street, the cities become better places to live. I try to walk to my office or try to ride a bicycle. The vehicles create pollution. So there are externalities that they produce. Before I worked in Cabify, I worked in the electric vehicle company. You know? So we feel we are doing something good for the world and for society by eliminating these externalities from there. And then, I mean, one of the experiments I do every time I jump in one of our vehicles or in the competition, I always ask the drivers, how are you feeling? And most of the time in my network, I use a fake name and even a fake picture so they don't know who I am. No? And of course, sometimes they complain about things they don't like, and that gives you feedback about how to improve it. But every once in a while, someone tells you, oh, Cabify changed my life. I didn't have, imagine someone in Peru or in Mexico didn't even have a bank account. He didn't have access to the banking system. We got him into the banking system. He has a bank account. He has access to credit. A few months later, he's able to finance a vehicle. He now can support his family with his own enterprise. And then he starts buying other vehicles and puts other people to work. No? So we are making cities better. We are creating employment for people who didn't have access to safe employment. And I include in this group women that now have a safe work because they don't have to manage cash. There is this reputation and identity issue that allows us to provide a safe service. So, I mean, you feel great working on Cabify.
Yeah, I came at this as an activist for social and environmental causes. And I think the most leveraged place, I could find was to start a business to try and impact big change here. And I love this area because transportation touches, the three things I'm most passionate about. You have social, so you're bringing people together. You're helping them get out and do more and experience their city more and making cities a better place to live. Economic, you're giving people the option to have less expensive transportation and only pay for it for each ride, not have to, once you've invested in a car, you've spent all that money, you're stuck and you're just paying for more and more and more. And then the third is environmental. And whether it's a service like Lyft Line, where we're getting multiple people in a single car, or thinking ahead to electric cars and fuel cell vehicles. So the really interesting thing is electric cars and fuel cell vehicles are cheaper over the life of the vehicle. Over the 10 to 15 year life, it's cheaper per mile. But that's a really long payback. And so when you put an electric car into on-demand transportation network, you're going to use that car up. It'll do 200,000 miles over the first 3 years of its life. That means it pays back in 3 years instead of 10 to 20. So I think there's obviously a lot of technology advancements that are being made for the electrification of vehicles. But ultimately, I think the big economic wave will come because of these on-demand transportation networks. So it's a very, very exciting space. I think there's going to be a huge amount of positive impact here.
他の質問はいかがでしょうか。では
Are there any other questions? I see a hand towards the center of the room, please. Thank you.
もう一度手を挙げて。
If you can kindly raise your hand one more time, please, because we will be bringing you a microphone. May I ask this question in Japanese? So I would like to ask in Japanese. Thank you. I want to ask about the future a bit. So the industrial structure will change through rideshare and autonomous driving. Obviously, this means that jobs and the state of jobs will change. Drivers or those that have been involved in the automotive business, their jobs will change as well. They'll shift. So in rural areas, there will be benefits, but at the same time, the impact on the job industry itself, if we consider this as a positive trend, then we do have to supply those that have been that no longer have jobs. We have to create some sort of alternative, and I ask this in a very positive way. So, any thoughts on this?
じゃあ私の方から。
If I may respond to the extent that I can, right now the automotive industry, up to this point, control technologies and mechanical technology and autonomous driving, the skill sets are very different. So it does mean that we'll need new type of researchers, new type of engineers, which means that I think there are actually more jobs that are being generated. Now, yes, the OEMs may have to change their structure, but the fact that the new industry will need some of these new skill sets, I believe that the manufacturers will understand that there will be more jobs. And at the same time, there will be there will be an increase in jobs. At the same time, there is a lack of people that can fill in these empty spaces. Again, I go back to the rural areas. It's depopulated. And by including automated driving, it will offset the lack of population. So there is a positive side to this. Now, there may be people that are challenged or find it an impediment with autonomous driving, but again, as a result, a new industry, a new vertical will arise. And so maybe we have to keep in mind that we do need to accommodate this change.
Yeah, I think if you look back at history, you'll see that every major change in transportation infrastructure came with a huge economic boom. So first, you can look to canals, and then the railway systems, and then the highway systems. And I think what we're witnessing is going to be the next massive wave of transportation, and the net benefit, I think, will open up all sorts of economic opportunities, create all sorts of new jobs, get increased productivity by giving people time back in their day, get people out doing more in their cities, and all of that economic activity will create lots and lots of more jobs. There will be a lot of change, and that change will be, I think, tough to navigate, but the best news is that we have time. We see that coming now, and if we start taking actions now, making investments in education, training for the new types of jobs that are going to be created and going to be available, we have time to prepare ourselves for this change that's coming over the next 10 years.
So if I could make an additional comment here. So this isn't a question limited to autonomous driving. It's a question directed to the whole autonomous industry. No? So robots, this has been around for a while, and every time there is a technology change, some jobs disappear, and new jobs are created. But framing the question in a broader scope, economists are already looking at this question, and as more time frees up and new opportunities emerge, some people are questioning even the fact that we have to work. So, I mean, we take that as a hypothesis. We have to work to produce for society, but maybe we reach a point where energy becomes less expensive, and there are jobs that don't need to be done by us, and work and jobs can become an option. No? So there are, again, some economists that suggest that we have a minimum wage warranted, and then people who want to go beyond that, they get the option to work. No? So these are things that are being thought based on all of these changes, and we have time to think. We'll see where we end.
Okay, let's dive into the wrap-up because we're a little bit past time. Just wanted to see if you could summarize or any additional thoughts or any questions you might have had for each other under the theme of future mobility and what you guys plan to do in the coming years, coming time. Maybe start off with Suganuma sensei.
はい、ライドシェアリング
So major theme for this discussion is ride sharing, and the connecting between, or by combining ride sharing and autonomous driving will enable a lot of different things. Maybe people who are in struggle, or maybe people who want to use the time for different purposes. This is going to be significant for those people, not just for Japan, but for the global scale. This is going to pave the way for the new industry. And also, I think it used to be a waste of time to go to the different place, but maybe you can use this time for doing different things. We are engineers, so maybe we want to really promote this industry in terms of the engineering perspective. And also there are two new service providers. So maybe by combining the effort, we want to create the new, create better society.
Logan?
I think the future is going to be awesome.
After that, all I can say that I agree. We're going to have a great future. We'll all be happy, and we won't have to work.
Okay, well, on that exciting note, let's wrap up the discussion. Thank you so much for coming today, and I hope that it was a stimulating topic. Thank you.